Welcome to Tarkir Dragonstorm. I'm DarcyBits here with another new set top 10 Pauper Commander review. This is not going over the commons that can be played in your Pauper deck, but the uncommon creatures that can be your Pauper Commander. For anyone who doesn't know, Pauper Commander is played with 99 common cards in your deck and one uncommon creature in the command zone. Otherwise, normal commander rules apply, such as color identity, commander tax, and commander damage. However, it only takes 16 commander damage to knock you out of the game. Tarkir Dragonstorm brings us a host of new cards in both common for our 99 and uncommon creatures for our commander. In this set, all of the new mechanics are completely backwards compatible. There's nothing that refers to specifically a new keyword by another card that we would have to discuss. This means that there's a lot of support for all of the new commanders because they're not trying to do something entirely new, they are simply giving new shape and form or tools to existing mechanics or archetypes from the past. With that said, let's count down the top 10 Pauper Commanders for Tarkir Dragonstorm. Number 10, Dulkum Packbeasts. Dulkum Packbeasts is a 3-mana white 0/4 Ox. It has Vigilance and Mobilize 3. Mobilize is the new Mardu mechanic, which means when this creature attacks, create a number of tapped and attacking red warrior creature tokens equal to the Mobilize value. They're 1/1s and they get sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step. What this means is that Dulkum Packbeasts at its bare minimum is a 3-mana 0/4 with Vigilance that is a 3/4 while attacking. The 3 bodies has an upside of needing to be blocked individually, so you might still be able to get damage through when you otherwise might not. The one downside of Dulkum Packbeasts is that there are no mono white anthem effects in common. Any effect that sits on the battlefield and gives a static +1/+1 to all of your creatures would be really good here, because for this creature you'd be getting an effective +4 attack. The real value in Dulkum Packbeasts I see is that the Mobilize effect is creating bodies and sacrificing them. This makes it a very strong support piece for any archetype that cares about creatures entering under your control or dying under your control, such as using any of the alliance effects from New Capenna or using cards like Unruly Mob from Midnight Hunt. Number 9, Cori Mountain Stalwart. Cori Mountain Stalwart is a 3-mana red and white 3/3 human monk with Flurry, which is just an ability word that represents anything that triggers when you cast your second spell in a turn. Cori Mountain Stalwart reads, whenever you cast your second spell each turn, this creature deals 2 damage to each opponent and you gain 2 life. This is very reminiscent of any of the normal spell slinger strategies we've seen time and time again. A lot of them trigger whenever you cast a spell and deal 1 damage to each of your opponents. These strategies encourage you to be casting as many spells as you can to be getting as many of these triggers, whereas Cori Mountain Stalwart only cares when you cast your exact second, but you're getting 2 damage and 2 life, which makes it very comparable. This lends itself to a strategy that is similar but different, where instead of asking you to cast as many spells as you can, it wants you to cast 2 and then stop, and then cast another 2 on your opponent's turn, and then another 2 on your next opponent's turn, and then another 2 on your next opponent's turn, and then it's back to you again. As you can see, this is very similar to any normal spell slinger strategy, it's just the pacing is a bit different. If you compare it to Gutter Snipe, the standard example of this archetype, it has a few key differences. Gutter Snipe will deal 2 damage per spell, whereas this card is dealing an effective 1 damage per spell once you've cast your second. But it gives you additional life gain, it expands your color identity to include white, and it keys off of any spell cast, not just instants and sorceries. Because of this, I think it can stand on its own as a distinct alternate option for a similar archetype that can be built a bit differently. Number 8, Jeskai Shrinekeeper. Jeskai Shrinekeeper is a 5-mana blue, red, and white 3/3 dragon with flying, haste, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you gain 1 life and draw a card. This card is pretty simple on paper, but it's giving you a decent toolbox for a lot of different archetypes, which you could maybe combine or pick and choose your favorites. It's giving you consistent card draw, it's giving you consistent life gain, it's giving you a consistent flyer to consistently hit in for damage. It's just doing a lot of things very well. It is a bit expensive, but it's a lot of value too. Number 7, Yathen Tombguard. Yathen Tombguard is a 3-mana black 2/3 human warrior with Menace. Whenever a creature you control with a counter on it deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card and lose 1 life. Now you're going to have to watch out to not die to your own life drain, but the card advantage here is very impressive. I feel like a lot of cards these days are printed with when 1 or more creatures deal combat damage to a player to limit the amount that you can actually draw off them. And while this does have the restriction of needing a counter on those creatures, it is triggering for each and every one. If you played a full modular style deck that has every creature you play enter with a +1/+1 counter, this is going to be drawing for every one of your creatures very consistently. That sort of card advantage may not be that interesting in its own right, but it's going to snowball out of control. And because it cares only about creatures with counters specifically, it still gives you an interesting build around and not just a decent value card. Number 6, Bone Cairn Butcher. Bone Cairn Butcher is a 4-mana red, white, and black 4/4 demon. It has Mobilize 2, which again means when it attacks, it creates 2 1/1 red warrior creature tokens that are tapped and attacking. These get sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step. And it has attacking tokens you control have Death Touch. Being able to consistently attack with chumps and have them not just get eaten by something large, either consistently getting in damage or killing something in the process, is really valuable for that consistent aggro plan putting pressure on people's life totals. With the reduced life total of 30 in Pauper Commander as opposed to Commander's 40, this sort of aggro strategy is a lot more viable than it might be otherwise. Other than the value in having a broad color identity, this card also just is one of the few ways of getting Death Touch on your team at all. There are a few other ways of getting it, either temporarily if you jump through certain hoops, or only applying to certain creature types, whereas this is hitting just any token. Sure, that's not as universal as any creature, but tokens are so plentiful that it's going to be pretty consistent compared to any other option, making it really stand out as a new powerful Pauper Commander. Number 5, Jeskai Brushmaster. Jeskai Brushmaster is a 4-mana blue, red, and white 2/4 orc monk with double strike and prowess. Prowess in the command zone is always pretty strong, and because it only cares about non-creature spells, it gives you a decent build around for the rest of the deck. With the addition of Double Strike, each of your prowess triggers gives you an effective additional +1/+1, and it protects the commander when they're attacking, allowing you to make a lot more aggressive plays instead of having to make sure you have a perfectly viable attack. You force your opponent to either let something die without actually dealing damage back to Jeskai Brushmaster, or taking double their power in commander damage. Number 4, Marshal of the Lost. Marshal of the Lost is a 4-mana white and black 3/3 orc warrior with Death Touch. It reads, whenever you attack, target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of attacking creatures. This is another one that's trying to get as big a damage number as possible, but it wants you to be supporting an entire wide team instead of just one creature. However, this +X/+X can target anything, something that cares about getting damage in, or itself for that sweet, sweet commander damage. The fact that it does not need to be attacking always gives additional value to a creature, and with Death Touch, it can be a really solid blocker to dissuade attacks back at you when you're left inevitably open trying to swing with every single one of your creatures. It gives you a strong build around of going wide and a very clear win condition of beat face really hard. Number 3, Hardened Tactician. Hardened Tactician is a 3-mana white and black 2/4 human warrior with 1, sacrifice a token, draw a card. Sacrifice outlets in the command zone are always very good. And while it's limited to only tokens, it's doing something actually relevant and really strong. It's not just a sack outlet to make sure you can trigger your death triggers, it is actually doing something good for you, drawing you cards. Now, it's not free to sacrifice with this commander, but it's still pretty cheap, and if you compare it to similar commanders, you'll see it's much stronger of an effect than others tend to have. The other thing about sacrifice a token is it's potentially a sneaky upside. Sure, you can't sacrifice creatures that want to die, but you can sacrifice things other than creatures, which sometimes has a lot of value, turning random treasures or food into card draw. Number 2, Host of the Hereafter. Host of the Hereafter is a 4-mana black and green 2/2 zombie warlock. It says this creature enters with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and whenever this creature or another creature you control dies, if it had counters on it, put its counters on up to 1 target creature you control. I absolutely adore this card. It is such a powerful effect to make sure your counters basically never go away. As long as Host of the Hereafter is on the field, your counters will go somewhere. And as we mentioned before, it's not that hard to get an entire deck that only has creatures that enter with counters. Then those counters will move to something else when they die, and of course that creature also entered with counters, and you get this massive snowball of power that just doesn't go away. Even if Host of the Hereafter dies, they can send their counters onto someone else, and as long as you can play Host of the Hereafter before that creature dies, you can just keep that ball rolling. Absolutely love this card. It goes right into any normal +1/+1 counter synergy archetype, but it's doing something very new in that same space. Before I go on to my top pick for Tarkir Dragonstorm's Pauper Commander, I want to go through a few honorable mentions. Sunset Strike Master is a 2-mana 3/1 human monk that says tap, add red, and 3-mana tap, sacrifice this, deal 6 damage to target creature with flying. That second mode is pretty situational, but being a mana dork in the command zone is always valuable. Now, red, if you expand your color identity to red-green, has some other options. Ruby Daring Tracker or Rada Ertikeld are the most obvious examples. This lets you still play red, but you're additionally getting green. Now, if you really don't want to be running green, you want to run a mono red list, then Sunset Strike Master might be worth it. But generally, on paper, Ruby or Rada are just better. So I really couldn't confidently add it to the list. Attuned Hunter and Kishla Skimmer are 2 cards that go in a very similar archetype, so I want to talk about them together. Attuned Hunter is a 3-mana 3/3 human ranger, trample whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard during your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and Kishla Skimmer is a green and blue 2/2 with flying, and whenever a card leaves your graveyard during your turn, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. Attuned Hunter was originally on the main list before I really noticed that there's just not a lot you can do with the cards leaving the graveyard synergy in mono green, in common. There's certainly a few, but just like not that much. If Kishla Skimmer made them, then you have a bit more options since you're adding blue to the pool. But I just don't think Kishla Skimmer is good enough. Whereas Attuned Hunter is going to get very big and hit you very hard, especially with trample, Kishla Skimmer is going to draw you 1 card. And it's limited to once a turn. It's not just on my turn, then your opponent's turn, because it has to trigger during your turn. So it really is a hard limit of once per entire round, making it just not that impressive. Next, we have Krumar Initiate, a 2-mana 2/2 black human cleric with X, black, and tap, pay X life. This creature endures X. Activate only as a sorcery. Endure is a mechanic I haven't got to talk about at all in this video yet, but it basically just gives you the choice of gaining counters equal to its value or making an XX equal to that same value. What makes Krumar Initiate actually pretty interesting is the fact that X can be 0. At least nothing says it can't as far as I can tell. So you spend 0 and black and tap it, you pay 0 life, and then you get a 0/0, dying immediately. This means for the low cost of 1 black mana, you can actually create a thing that immediately dies, triggering anything that you have that cares about that. Which is a pretty cool commander, but I don't know if it's good enough to really be that relevant. It is fun that it has the alternate mode of sinking a ton of mana and life into it to make a big beater and maybe win the game that way. So it gives you alternate lines, and I think it's worth talking about, but just not top 10. Venerated Stormsinger is a 4-mana black 3/3 orc cleric. It has mobilize 1, and whenever this creature or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This is an effect we've seen a ton of times. I almost did put it on the actual list just because I do think that these sorts of aristocrat strategies are very powerful and very worth exploring. This card is pretty comparable to a lot of other options. It's just not all that much better. The benchmark for aristocrats in the command zone with this style of effect would be, in my opinion, Zulaport Cutthroat. It's a 2-mana 1/1 that has the same death trigger effect, where you're not only pinging the table for 1, but also gaining 1 life. Venerated Stormsinger gives you Mobilize, which can give you an extra body who is dying, guaranteed, but you have to attack with the Stormsinger to get that body, so it's not as consistent as you might expect if you don't want to be risking your commander. The biggest upside to me is just the fact that it's a 3/3, which, I don't know. Zulaport Cutthroat looks like it's going to die instantly to any incidental ping. So there is value there, but Venerated Stormsinger is still 4 mana compared to Zulaport Cutthroat's 2, which is just kind of a big ask. And with that, it's time for the Number 1, Tarkir Dragonstorm, Pauper Commander. Number 1, Kheru Goldkeeper. A 4-mana, black, green, and blue 3/3 dragon with flying. And whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard during your turn, create a treasure token. Yes, we talked about it in the honorable mentions that cards leaving the graveyard during your turn is a decently supported mechanic, but really just didn't have enough support in blue or green. But in blue, black, and green? Yes, there is suddenly enough cards that really care about this. And this effect is probably better than the other 2 anyway. Creating treasures is very strong. You can do things that care about artifacts entering the battlefield, or leaving the battlefield, or just getting mana, because mana is good. Can you go infinite with this? Probably not. But can you hit it very consistently? Yes. Reminder, Cauldron Familiar is just a common. It also has a renew effect, which means you can pay a cost and exile it from your own graveyard for a certain effect. It's probably not that big a deal because you're probably going to send it back to the command zone. However, because it's a commander, you can do some fun things with letting it die, spending 5 mana, exiling it from the graveyard, having it go back to the command zone, and you still get your 2+1/+1 counters and a flying counter on a target creature, which could be pretty good. As I like to say, flyers win games. That brings us to the end of Tarkir Dragonstorm Pauper Commander review. I've been Darcy Bits, and I'll see you next time.